And welcome back to the second part of Talking Europe on France 24. I'm joined here at the studio of the European Council in Brussels by Pierre Vimont. Now, Pierre Vimont was the first Executive Secretary General of the European External Action Service. For those who don't know, that's the new European diplomatic service that was launched as a result of the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty. Mr. Vimont, thank you very much for being with us. You were working hand in hand with High Representative Catherine Ashton, who's been replaced by Italy's Federica Mogherini. You served a long diplomatic career with the French Foreign Service, and I add that these days you're a senior associate at Carnegie Europe. Now, let's start with the Eastern Partnership Summit. On Thursday, EU leaders flocked to Riga, the capital of Latvia, to meet counterparts from 6 former Soviet republics: Belarus, Moldova, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and last but not least, Georgia. Now, the aim, of course, is to forge closer ties with these countries. But Russia says that essentially the Eastern Partnership is an anti-Russian scheme. Is it true?
No, I think they're wrong. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with regard to that. What we're witnessing at the moment, and the Ukrainian crisis was very obvious from that point of view, is that we have 2 narratives, one in Moscow, one in Brussels and in Eastern and in European Union member states, which don't match at the moment, and I think we really need to do that. Eastern Partnership was something very simple. It was about how to manage and accommodate our neighborhood on the eastern part of our continent after the huge enlargement that we had at the beginning of the 2000, 2003, 2005, with 12 new member states stepping in, and those who were not in were wondering what is going to happen to us. So it was about bringing peace, prosperity, stability in that region, to have, as it was said, a ream of friends around there, and it still remains the case. I think maybe one of the difficulties when we set up this Eastern Partnership, we maybe didn't think enough about what role we would be given to Russia. By the way,
and precisely, why isn't Russia part of this partnership?
We proposed to Russia to be part of this Eastern Partnership. Maybe because, this is understandable, because Russia thought that it was a somewhat different country from the other ones, larger, more important international status, that they maybe needed something different. And we tried to build up something different with them on our bilateral partnership with them. But anyway, there was a misunderstanding as we went on building this policy of Eastern Partnership.
And who's responsible for this misunderstanding?
I think it's a little bit all of us. It's due to the fact also, if you take a look at all this with a little bit of insight, you know, since the end of the Berlin Wall, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we have been building up slowly a new European order, with a new membership into the OSCE, new membership into NATO, new memberships into the European Union. We have built something that Russia has been observing with some frustration. Mm-hmm.
Now, as you mentioned, and that was really the feeling in Riga, I guess, now it's time for appeasement with Moscow. It's a very difficult task, obviously. But hasn't Russia, though, through its aggression against Ukraine, succeeded in denting the enthusiasm of the Europeans?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't go along those who talk about appeasement. I think, first of all, we have to be very clear and very firm. We can't accept what has happened in Crimea, first of all, with this annexation through use of force. And we can't accept what is going on in eastern Ukraine. Now we're trying to solve that. So we're trying to solve that through the implementation of the Minsk agreement, where, as you know, Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande have played a big part in trying to broker some sort of de-escalation there. And we have to support that as much as we can. We have to support the efforts of the Ukrainian government in trying to handle its economic transition as it is going on. There we have to do something. With regard to Russia, we have to see how we can build up a new dialogue with them but on the condition that they have to abide by what we're trying to do in Ukraine.
Now, I mentioned the 6 countries in question. Some are very keen to move closer to Europe. Others are more interested in keeping very close ties with Russia. I'm thinking of Armenia particularly. Now, Georgia, which has for a long time been pro-EU, is quite disappointed by the pace of progress. For instance, we still don't have a visa-free regime for Georgians, and they're starting to lose patience with Europe. Isn't there a danger that we will end up discouraging those countries who are eager to move closer to Europe?
I think we need to improve our act with regard to the Eastern Partnership. And as you know, certainly, we are in the process of reviewing our whole neighbourhood policy, of which Eastern Partnership is a part. Proposals will be put on the table in the near future with a hope to find an agreement before the end of the year. Consultation is going on with our eastern partner just as with our southern neighbours. And they're sending us back some very interesting message. Precisely that we should be more efficient in the way we proceed, to take into account what they're asking for, what they're looking for, to take into account the fact that they are going through different situations and that they may not all want the exact same type of partnership with Europe.
No one-size-fits-all approach, that's what you're telling us.
Something that would be more tailor-made. And therefore we may be going in the months ahead towards association agreements that would be tailor-made for each and every one. You were talking about Armenia. Armenia said in 2013 that they didn't want the kind of association agreement we had proposed to them, the one-size-fits-all type, but that they would like maybe another kind of agreement. Let's go, let's discuss this, and let's see how we can move on.
They went ahead with the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Alliance. Now,
Could I just add one point on visas? On visas, whether it be with Georgia or with Ukraine, with whom also we are discussing this, we will get an agreement in due course. What is the problem at the moment is not lack of willingness. It's a technical problem mostly. We're dealing with rather complicated technical issues about which we need to have all the right guarantees before signing.
Now let's move to another big story this week, migration. Last week actually, Jean-Claude Juncker unveiled the new European agenda for migration. The EU, of course, is seeking to respond to the ongoing crisis in the Mediterranean. The Commission plans to introduce a quota-like system for the distribution of refugees throughout the EU. The reality today is that 5 countries take in roughly 50% of all asylum seekers. Germany, Sweden by far the most generous. Is it a good plan?
I think at least it is trying to cope with a very difficult situation, whereby at the moment those who arrive on the shores of Europe are mostly moving through, because of geography, moving through Italy, Cyprus, Malta, then are asking for asylum, and if possible, if a country accepts to greet them and to welcome them, go to these countries. The idea put forward by the Commission, which I think is personally as such a good idea, is to try for all member states to show a little bit more solidarity with regard to that. Then the proposals they're putting on the table may need to be reviewed. Maybe the criteria they're putting forward should be looked at, and member states will have time to look at all this and to give their position on this. But to have this idea that we're all together on the same boat and that we have to help each other rather than letting those refugees go to only 1 or 2 countries, I think seems to me to be much in line with what solidarity is all about.
And nevertheless, as you know better than me, it's a hard sell for the Commission. A number of countries have fiercely opposed the initiative, not least France, which interestingly initially supported the idea of quotas, but now the French Prime Minister calls the quota system unacceptable. Let's watch our report.
Prime Minister Manuel Valls and the Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve make a surprise visit to one of the hotspots for migrant arrivals in the south of France. The government opposes the European Commission's proposal to introduce quotas for the number of migrants to be hosted by each EU country.
L'asile est un droit. Asylum is a right, granted according to international criteria and applied by all of the members of the European Union. The number of people receiving asylum cannot be determined by quotas. One is seeking asylum or one is not, and if not, that person is deported.
Manuel Valls acknowledged the need for a fairer system. Only a few EU states receive the majority of migrants. Germany welcomed a third of all migrants coming to Europe in 2014. Many of those who survive the perilous journey across the Mediterranean arrive in Italy and continue through France, and often north to the United Kingdom. French and Italian forces have reinforced checks on trains and the main roads. Officials are setting their sights on human smugglers.
The battle against human traffickers, that's to say those who without any scruples take advantage of the misery of others, that's obviously a priority for us. We've already questioned 60 since the start of this year.
Human rights campaigners say increased law enforcement fails to address the causes of migration, like the war and upheaval that continue to uproot people, especially from Syria, Eritrea, and Libya.
Now, France is not alone in opposing the Commission's initiative. Spain, the UK, Finland, Poland have all come out against it. Is it dead in the water?
You know, it happens quite often. You know how it works in the European process. The Commission comes out with a proposal and then it is discussed by all 28, either immediately at the level of the ministers or at the level of ambassadors, so on and so forth. So let's wait for the debate to take place. At the moment we have statements made immediately afterwards by some important political figures, and of course they have the right to say so. But let's have an exchange of views. Let's try to understand exactly what's the problem. I'm sure that some member states will remain very cautious, not to say totally opposed to these ideas. But once again, this is about solidarity. Do we want to show a little bit of solidarity?
But precisely when you hear the French Prime Minister say that it's unacceptable to have quotas, and at the same time say that we need a better distribution, doesn't it show, though, the problem in Europe these days is that the mainstream parties are petrified by the populist parties. They don't dare say what they want to say, and we end up with these statements.
I think it shows that it is a very sensitive issue, first of all, and that we have really to deal with that. And secondly, it seems to me that, you know, political leaders, whatever they may think, cannot hope that this issue will just wither away, fall somewhere, and that we will forget about it. Because it is a structural problem. It's much more than only what is happening at the moment. It's a problem about poor countries in Africa or elsewhere being attracted by what's happening in Europe and wanting at all costs to cross the Mediterranean and go there. So it's a major problem. We have to deal with it from the source of the problem. We have to go in Africa and try to see how we can help this country to manage an economic development that will keep their own people there. Then the second source of refugees and illegal immigrants is usually crisis, political crisis, as in Syria or as in Iraq or maybe in other countries. Here also we need to put more diplomatic efforts in trying to find a solution out of this, because otherwise these flows will keep on coming in.
Well, after the Mediterranean, let's cross the Channel. As you know, in London, David Cameron wants an in-out referendum on Britain's EU membership before the end of 2017, possibly as early as next year. He wants a better deal with Europe. Does he have a point? Does Britain need to renegotiate the terms of its EU membership?
You know, if you ask the other 27 member states, they would say no. Britain has already a lot of opting outs, and they should be happy with that. But the fact is that the British Prime Minister wants to have another negotiation.
Is he playing with fire?
I hope not. And I think we can find a way out. The real difficulty will be to see what exactly David Cameron is asking for. And I think one point will be difficult for other member states to accept. It would be a renegotiation that would end with a review of the treaty, with the need to revise the treaty, because there I see no appetite among member states to go along that line. But if it is a way of accommodating Britain on some issues in order to be able then to start again altogether, I think this will work, and this may work at the end of the day, because I think the real issue for most of the member states is to try to avoid a first example of somebody leaving.
Your instinct as a diplomat, you know Britain very well. Will the Brits vote to stay in Europe? Can you imagine Britain leave the EU altogether?
We will see. We all watch very closely opinion polls, which seem to indicate that there's still a small margin in favor of Europe. I witnessed at the time I was posted in London the referendum in 1975 that surprisingly came out with a 2/3 majority in favor of Europe. I think that if there is goodwill on all parts, on both sides, there are ways of accommodating British request.
Very briefly, we mentioned the Brexit, a possible Brexit. What about the Grexit? What would be the political consequence of Greece leaving the Eurozone?
It would be huge. It would be just like in the case of Britain. For the first time, it would have shown that the trend towards an improved and increased European Union, reinforced European Union, is not irreversible, and that therefore you can come in and you can come out, and that would be a precedent that we've never had so far. So I think everybody would be very cautious with being tempted to play with this.
Pierre Vimont, thank you very much for talking to us. I remind our viewers that you served as the first Executive Secretary General of the European External Action Service, that's the European Diplomatic Service, and you currently serve as a Senior Associate with Carnegie Europe. And thank you for watching this edition of Talking Europe. I was at the European Council in Brussels, but it's time now to go back to Paris for more news on France 24.